Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. So today's guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast is David Roche. In this episode, David, now living past his terminal cancer prognosis, looks back at his life with honesty and thoughtfulness. That was really touching. Now 76, he discussed the suicide of his father when he was 5 and his subsequent difficulties growing up as a young gay man with a stepfather in Georgia who was determined to make a man of him. However, David, after many struggles, went his own way anyway, and he studied modern dance with the foremost disciples of Martha Graham. That was after getting acquitted from military school after he was in a boxing match and pretended to get his jaw broken. So he had to have it wired together in order to get acquitted. So he ended up, after a couple of formative love relationships with men, in the end setting up a family in Adelaide where he was invited having to teach at a university there. Finally, after early retirement at 48 from that university in Australia, Adelaide, somehow he found Ashtanga yoga and he travelled to Mysore when he was 48 for the first time. So after a number of trips to be certified, he was certified by Joyous and continued to teach internationally, as well as spending 3 months a year assisting Saraswati in Mysore till last year. Due to technical difficulties, we did this episode twice, and I have to say, after spending all this time with David, it was really a joy to spend that time with him, casting his eye over his life. And I feel this episode was one of the episodes I really learned the most from. So I hope you enjoy it too. So welcome, David, to the Keen on Yoga podcast. Our second attempt at this episode, and let's hope it goes smoothly this time. Welcome. Nice to have you again. And not from any fault of ours, and it was a great interview, but the recording, because I'm in France and David's in Australia, the recording broke up. And so this is our second attempt, so always on the second attempt, it usually actually goes better than the first attempt. So let's take it this time, and this time we're going to structure, this is a good idea, a retrospective of David's life. I'm going to structure it through the 4 traditional stages of Indian spiritual life or Vedic spiritual life. So it says Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and the Sannyasa stage, the 4 stages. So the first stage of David's life is the Brahmacharya stage, which do you want to explain what the Brahmacharya stage is, David, or do you want me to explain it?
That starts at birth. It is the student stage. It starts at birth and goes to about 25, 28.
Okay.
So it's your time of being a student and going to the guru's house, being a student. Yeah.
Right. And how was that for you? Because I know, the first episode I was amazed, and we spoke quite length about your background, because you have an incredible background with dance, and you studied, I think, not with Martha Graham herself, but under the prime disciples of Martha Graham. Is that correct, in New York? So you want to talk a little bit about your background in the movement before you came to Ashtanga at the ripe old age of 48, I believe.
Yeah, well, that you're jumping ahead. That's not Brahmacharya.
I know. I'm going ahead of myself. I know. Let's stick to the stages. First stage, Brahmacharya. Okay.
You want to know?
Yes, that's why we're here. I want to know.
I was born in the Deep South in Georgia. The address is 519 Charlton Road, Somerville Park, Rome, Georgia. The house is still standing there. And it is a little white clapboard house. Or was a white clapboard house, and now it's a little yellow clapboard house. But you can see it on Google. If you just Google it, it'll be up there.
Right.
Yeah. The Brahmacharya stage of my life, I call for my memory is my men's stage. It has to do with the men in my life, starting with my father. So up until the age of 5, I don't have a lot of memory about it, other than that I remember sitting on his lap, or remember going into the kitchen in the early morning when it was still dark, and he and my mother were talking in whispers, and they were having coffee and donuts, and he would dip his donut in his coffee and give me a little bit of donut. That is one of my favorite memories of him. But when I was 5.5, almost 5.5, before that, up until that time, he had been having severe depression and had gone through all kinds of problems with depression. And he went out to the garage next to that house and put a shotgun to his chest and shot himself. So that began my first real relationship with a man, and the most important man in my life, and that was my father. Within a year and a half, I had another relationship with a man, and that was my stepfather. And my mother married, my stepfather had already had a wife, and she had died of an overdose of morphine from having particularly painful periods. So she had died about the same time that my father had died, and they had been couples. They played canasta together. So that my mother got together with my stepfather, and he was a very different from my father. He had been raised by a railroad worker. He was very much a blue collar worker. He had been made to leave school at the age of 8 and take care of his younger brothers. So his concern for me, overriding concern my whole life, was that he needed to make a man out of me. That was his full concern. He thought that I had become a sissy because I had been taken care of by my aunts and my mother during this time. And so he took this on as his challenge. And so he very much wanted to totally control my life, and did that. And so from that early age, we moved several different times. That left me kind of having had the suicide of my father, and then moving to different locations and having new groups of people to get to know. I never really felt that I fit in. And so those years were really difficult and still remain in my memory as difficult. So we moved to a tiny little town of 1,500 people, where everyone knew everybody, like a little village. And I went to, starting there in the 4th grade, and went through until the end of high school. And during those years, that's when I learned, I was the only one in my class to be in the band. I played clarinet in the marching band, and then I played oboe in the symphony band. And then became my junior year, I became drum major. And that meant I got to wear the tall hat and twirl the baton and march in front of the group. So that was the beginning of finally becoming somebody other than the sissy that my stepfather wanted to change. But I was doing it my way, and that was to become the drum major. Well, my stepfather was still really concerned about me, and I wanted to go away from that house because he and I fought a great deal. And so I wanted to go away to college, and the only college that he would allow me to go to was a military college. So, he and the principal of my high school visited they took me to visit that military college up in the north of Georgia, and that's where I was to go to high school. I would go to college.
Yeah,
4-year ROTC, regular Army training school. And that's where I went. I found that really very difficult.
It's so funny listening to the discrepancy of your, what I know of you now and your background. This upbringing is just incredible to hear.
So yeah. I stayed. I was there for a year, and I did okay. I enjoyed the marching. I enjoyed the playing in the band. I played the
dancing part.
It was very much. marching is rhythm, and it's with a lot of people, and there's pageantry, and there are flags, and that whole bit. I really enjoyed that. That worked for me. I also loved social dancing, and we had lots of dances. And there was one girls' dormitory. It's the only coeducational military college in the United States, but there was one girls' dormitory, so we could invite the girls and have social dancing, and that I enjoyed as well. And that's when I could shine. I could show off. Otherwise, I couldn't very much. But one of the problems for me was that during those years, these were Kennedy years, during those years, just before Kennedy was shot, actually, he had mandated that every child study physical education every term of their education, from the primary school all the way up through high school and university. So what we had to do in military school was one term we would have swimming, one term we would have another different kind of aspect. In my second year, we had boxing. And that threw me, because I was not a hero in boxing, and I didn't like getting hit. When I got hit as a child, I would cry.
Fair enough.
I would cry. I didn't like being hit. It hurt. So in the final of the test for the boxing class, I was put with another boy who didn't particularly like boxing, and we finished our rounds to get our grade. And the coach didn't like what he saw, and he decided he should make a man out of both of us. So he separated us, this other kid, and put us both with the two strongest guys in the class. And so I had to fight this strong guy. He knocked the headgear off. He knocked me down. He just pelted me completely. And I was so totally humiliated. I can't tell you how humiliated it was, with the other guys standing around and laughing and jeering, that I could have crawled under the earth if it had been possible. I was that humiliated by it. So I had my jaw slightly hurt from that, and I decided that my jaw needed to be broken. And so I faked holding my jaw in a particular position long enough that I got through the medical, and they wired my jaw back together. And that gave me permission from my parents to leave that college. And so that was the only way I could get out, was by getting my jaw wired together.
But there was actually nothing wrong with your jaw.
Correct.
So did that leave you with any lasting kind of difficulties with your jaw then?
No. At the time, it was very painful to have wires stuck through the tops of your teeth and wired together and holding your mouth together with rubber bands.
Yeah.
But it was worth it to get out of it, to have some way to get back from that sense of embarrassment that I had. And I didn't have to live in the dorm anymore. I could live in the infirmary during that time. And that's when I was able to leave then and go to the college, which was nearer my home and could be a day student. And it was at that college that a group from Texas Women's University came through and asked me if I wanted a scholarship to go to Perry Mansfield School of Theater and Dance in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, for the summer. And I leapt at the chance and went running home saying, guess what, I got a scholarship. And my father said, no, you didn't. You're not going there. That's a fancy girls' school. And finally, my mother said, yes, he is. And so that was my chance. And that I escaped and got on a train in Tallapoosa, Georgia. And it took me 3 days to get to Colorado. Within 24 hours, I had met my first homosexual lover. And that was a huge thing for me, because this man was 15 years older, and he was the first man that had showed me, that's why I'm calling this is my men stage. He was the first man that showed me some love, some consideration, some tenderness. And he was a university professor, and I followed him to Jamestown College in Jamestown, North Dakota, and finished my Bachelor of Arts degree there. And in art and in biology. And then spent a year there staying with him, and the principal of the president of the college liked me, so he gave me a job to stay for a year. And I made applications to go to graduate school. And so I was going to go to graduate school in art history. And I went to the, while I was there at Indiana University, the first week that I was there, I found the woman that had given me the scholarship to Perry Mansfield School of Theater and Dance was in the dance department at Indiana University. And she said, come on and do a dance class with us. And so I did. And she said, why don't you get out of art history and come into the physical education program in dance? I took some wrangling to do that, but I did that, and I got into that program and was appreciated in that program. And in the summers of that program, I got scholarships to go to the American Dance Festival in New London, Connecticut. And that's where I first met the New York teachers that were the students of Martha Graham, or teachers for Martha Graham, for Jose Limon, for Alvin Ailey, for various ones for those 2 different summers. And from there, I made my way. Oh, sorry, that I have to add one other thing. At Indiana University, I met my second homosexual lover, and that the first one lasted 4 years. The second one lasted 4 years, and we went to New York together. He was made dean of students at Uppsala College in East Orange, New Jersey, and I went into New York to dance. And so we had family, and that was the beginning of my training. That's where in professional dance in New York, and I was attending ballet classes as well as modern dance classes. And this is where when I went to the Martha Graham studio and was a scholarship student there, and then eventually danced with the Graham Apprenticeship Company and with Bertram Ross and Mary Hinkson and some of those people during that time of the late 60s. I was given again a visitation by the lady from Perry Mansfield and from Indiana University. She now was teaching in Michigan, and she asked me to come there and teach for a term. So I went there and taught that term, was visited by a woman from Florida State University that came there to work in that department for just a couple of weeks. And she suggested that they would like me at Florida State University to be there for a year. So this is what I said, okay, I will go there for a year. And meanwhile, I had gone back and forth to both dance in New York and continue with the companies that I was working with, and also to work at Bergdorf Goodman, which was a very fancy couture shop on the top of Fifth Avenue. Okay, so we're up now to
How old are you now?
Well, we're American Dance Festival is beginning to get to the end of the Brahmacharya phase.
Okay.
So now we're getting into, from there, let me see, I wrote it all down so that I can keep it all straight.
No, I think Vanaprastha stage is starting with the householder stage, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So now we're no, we're not starting. We're starting Grihastha. All right.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, Grihastha, the householder stage. Yeah.
We're in Grihastha now, and this is my women's phase. This is when I get the women in my life and work mostly with women in my life, and they become the more important for me. So I taught it, as I say, I taught at Eastern Michigan, and then I went to Florida State. And I was at Florida State then. I was supposed to stay a year. I stayed 10 years. And during that time, I met Francine, who also used the name of Simi. And I had decided that I had had enough of homosexual life, that I wanted to have a family. And that being a parent and being a father was extremely important to me, something that I wanted to do. And I thought I could do better than my fathers had done. And Simi was a beautiful, caring, extremely tender woman, and a wonderful dancer, very charismatic dancer, and we got along beautifully. And so in 1976, we married, and we had a bit of preparation beforehand, but within 3 months, Youngblood was born. And so that begins my householder stage in actuality, the Grihastha stage. So I was at Florida State University then from the early 70s in through into 1981, when I was invited to Australia in 1981 to come and help start the first degree course in modern dance at the university there. And again, I was to come for a year, and I stayed for I stayed until I retired from there in 1986. So about 15 years.
Right.
Okay.
And you're still there now in Australia, aren't you?
I'm still in Australia, but I left university in 1996. And that begins the Vanaprastha stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Carry on.
Okay. In the Vanaprastha stage, but there's some lead up into the Vanaprastha stage in terms of the yoga, though. And I wanted to mention there are more stages that don't actually fit into the stages. These are the people that I studied with. I last in terms of yoga, going all the way back. Lilas Folan, Osho Meditations, Oki Yoga Japan, Shandor Remite, Iyengar, Patabi Joyce, Tim Miller, Joyce Family, Dharma Mitra, Sharat and Simi Saraswati. All of those people fit into this stage that you are asking me about, or this progression in the life of dance and yoga. So by 1996, I had left. I had been made redundant from the university. They had closed the department and moved it to another university. I had been made redundant. I had seen Patabi Joyce in Hawaii in 1992. I had learned Richard Freeman's videotape to learn the first series of Ashtanga yoga, and I went to Mysore. Prior to going to Mysore, I went by way of Pune and to study with the Iyengars, since I had, and prior to that, it was a study with Shandor. So, I'm getting all confused now in terms of how to keep all of this straight for you.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
You have to ask questions because it's too complicated for. Ask me whatever you want to ask.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm quite enjoying just listening. I'm happy for you to carry on. And just to contextualize this, David, you're 78 now, is that right?
I'm 76. I'll be 77 in November.
76. Right. So, it's a retrospective of David's life. And one particularly unique thing about David is you started yoga, as we mentioned at the start, quite late. You came upon Mysore. You came to Mysore at 48?
At 48.
Or you started Ashtanga at 48, right?
But prior to that, prior to all that was Shandor. Shandor was hugely important.
Well, Shandor is a huge influence on many people, and he was a very profound guest on this podcast as well. So please, if you haven't listened to Shandor's podcast, and you get some background story on Shandor, and he is an incredible yoga teacher and human being.
But it was the Japanese Oki Yoga that told me about Shandor, who was in my hometown, and I didn't know that he was here. So that takes me back to about the beginning of Oki Yoga, Shandor, now Patabi Joyce. Okay, now we're there.
Okay, right. Well, actually, I'm kind of intrigued about the Oki Yoga, but we haven't got time to cover everything. So let's just start. And I remember in the last podcast, you said some interesting things about how you found Mysore at the start, and that you found it was kind of a supportive club when you joined it, and you found it was lesser so as time went on. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your first memories of Mysore, how it felt, how the other teachers were with each other, and how your relationship with Patabi Joyce and learning the sequence older at that age, because you didn't come to it. You were one of the older people in the group, I'm sure.
I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt from meeting Pattabhi Joyce and the group that had followed him, his entourage that had followed him across Europe and on to Encinitas and then finally into Hawaii. That was a really illustrious group of people that were with him and had been studying with him off and on for a long time. And so I found them very caring and very approachable, a very wonderful group of people to be around. I felt like an outsider because I was just coming into it, but certainly Tim Miller was extremely important to me in terms of being loquacious and equal to, easy to talk with. So I invited him to come to Australia to teach. And he suggested that I go to the Iyengar that I had been on a waiting list for. I went there, and that's when I went down from Iyengar to the Mysore. And when I arrived at Mysore, it was a group of no more than 30 people, all of us living in the Carvery Emporium, because that's where Guruji said to live. Guruji would stand at his front door and point down to the bank, down his bank, Guruji's bank, and say, you go there, change money, you come back 4:30 tomorrow morning. So I did that. Amma had met me at the door and she'd given me a cup of coffee, and that was my introduction to the two of them. And again, I found the people very welcoming, particularly two nurses from the UK that we played Scrabble together. I was still very timid. And so instead of living in the Carvery Emporium, I lived in the Metropole for that first 3 months. And what else?
I think we mentioned before, that it was a kind of supportive group, because latterly, I think some of our experiences that it has become more fractured. And at that time, you felt that that each person was quite supportive to one another.
Well, that's because each person had their own place to stay. I mean, if you weren't in your spot at 4:30 in the morning and you had been there,
right? Okay.
Guruji would say, "Where's David?" or "Where is whoever?" And you were expected to be there. And then if it was your turn to pay money, he'd say, "Leaving tomorrow?" Meaning that it's time for you to pay again if you're going to stay again. So he knew you by heart. You were in his book. And you would go to his office in the afternoon, pay your money, and he would count it. And it was all very personal from Guruji on down. You felt like you were in someone's home studying with that man, and you were a part of his tribe, part of his children. And that he was the same age that my father would have been had he lived. So it was very important for me to have this relationship with this older man now, who was very much a father to me. I wanted him to like me, and he learned my name, and I felt liked if he learned my name and asked where I was if I wasn't there. So yeah, it was important to me.
And how do you feel it changed over the years from your early days to later? And what point did it change?
It changed when Ashtanga yoga became a buzzword in New York, and so many people began of celebrity status began to be known, and they were advertising that they were doing this form of yoga and who this man was and how they were doing it, and they were showing up on shows like Oprah and talking about it, and that made other people want to study it. Guruji was telling those of us in his class to go ahead and teach. There was no system of teaching. There was not signing a letter. There were no certificates. If you ask him, what do you want me to do, Guruji? How can I serve you? He said, you teach. And so that's what I was doing. But it was much, as more people started to come, as it became more popular, and there were more people, he was then, instead of teaching 30 people, he was teaching 60 people, he was teaching 90 people, and he would be teaching from 4:30 in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was wearing him out, he and Sheriff together. It was really doing him in. And it was around this time that Amma died, and that really that was totally he was totally grief stricken, and it changed everything when that happened. So
How so?
yeah, she died in 1997.
How did everything change? What was changed?
He was much more distant. He would sit in his little front room by himself in the afternoon and read the paper, and gradually he would allow you to come in if you were coming to pay your money. Then you could sit and talk with him. And that became more people coming to sit and talk with him. And that became what was known as conference as it grew over several years, until the room was so crowded that people were standing on top of one another to get in to listen to Guruji talk. And you could ask him all kinds of questions. Oftentimes, the new arrivals would ask the same questions that the older arrivals had already asked, and people would throw their look up eyeballs and think, "Oh, not that question again." But he would be very patient and answer the questions.
And what about when he died? And when did he die? 2009.
2009.
2009. 2009.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And you say things changed again at that point.
Yeah. But let's get to that later, because that's a much thing.
Skipping a stage. Okay.
I want to talk about something else, and that is what happened then with Pattabhi Jois, simultaneous with Pattabhi Jois, when he said, "You teach." Then I came home and thought, how am I going to teach? Simi had said, "Oh, I want to do a yogashala here in Adelaide." And I said, "Only if you can, if I'm the boss and we do it the way that Guruji tells me to do it." And that did not work. And so I decided that I would go on the road. And that's when I devised something called Have Yoga, Will Travel. And that became my way of using what I had learned both in the dance and in the yoga to take forward in terms of teaching. It goes all the way back to my Southern Baptist upbringing in Georgia. And there is a Matthew quotation that says, "Go ye therefore into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always until the end of the earth." Well, that was my directive in terms of teaching yoga. I thought it was good enough for Christ. It's good enough for yoga. I believe that the body was this golden temple that we all have, and that's what I wanted to do. And people started asking me to teach. The first workshop that I did was first in Japan, and then the next one was in France. And word of mouth got around, and I started teaching. And still, there was no certification gone. That didn't come until 2002, 2001, and 2002. This was starting out and just going word of mouth.
So you were teaching with Simi for a while in Adelaide, and then did you split up then, or you were still together at that point?
We were still together, but I was traveling.
Right.
I was traveling.
Okay.
She was
and young dad must have been quite a young.
Right. Well, he had just finished at that time. He had just finished his university, and he was in advertising, and he had done a Bachelor of Arts in anthropology, and he had decided also that he wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and so he went to New York and did a master's degree in acting.
I didn't know that. Right. Yeah, he's quite funny. I never knew that about him. No.
That's when I introduced him to study with Eddie when he was in New York, and he became the student of Eddie. Yeah.
Okay.
And the distributor of Namarupa.
So to go back to the story, you're traveling at this time, and you're having success in the workshops on the front. And I think you came to London as well, and you taught at the place where I started teaching.
The Diorama Studio.
And you taught at Diorama. Okay. Right. How did that? What happened next?
I just kept traveling. I would go back to Adelaide and plan another trip. plan another trip.
Okay.
Teach. If Simi wanted me to teach in the shala, she was keeping the shala going. I would go in and teach there for a while, and then I would go on another trip.
Right. And you were going back to Mysore up until what point? Because I know latterly you've been going back every year to study with Saraswati. That's right.
Well, I had been going up until Guruji died. I had been going every year. From 1995 until that point, I had been going every year. Sometimes for 3 months, sometimes once or twice for 6 months. But I would go and love being there. That was my second home. I felt I called it my POP, my psychological observation place. I could really be on my own and really get into the yoga and in reading and into studying and being with other people of like mind. And that was very nourishing to me.
Yeah. And then what changed after the point of Pattabhi Joyce passing away?
Then things shifted dramatically. Yeah. There was such a political upheaval in the whole Ashtanga. Nobody knew what was happening. Lino was going one way. Sharat was wanting to go another way. Sharat was saying that the older teachers didn't know how to teach, and people were being offended and felt that things were not really well. That they were not well among the tribe. People were getting really upset with what was going on. So people kind of pulled off on their own and made their own workshops or confluences of groups of particular teachers that wanted to teach together. It was a kind of pulling into a different kind of tribal situation.
It's kind of, I think the way you described it last time, it really hit a note to me. And because I think when we approached it, I mean, I think I came there in 2007. So really the last years of Pattabhi Joyce's life. And, so I didn't really get a full understanding of how it was previously, but I didn't, it's always been a kind of slightly fractious and fractured kind of community aspect there. So I didn't realize that there was a more cohesive story previous to that time, which is interesting that you point out that it was much more supportive in the early days, right? You felt quite supported by the other members, and whereas latterly there's a lot more sense of competition, I suppose.
Well, as when Pattabhi Joyce made the certifications, and people were saying he was asking people to pay for the certification, but also he was naming them as who would be certified. And some people were asking to be certified. Some people he just gave them, you are certified. And those were people like Tim and Richard and people that had been doing it for a long time. Others were asking to be certified. And for whatever reason, he told me I was certified. I didn't ask for it. But that certification gave you a certain upness in terms of being able to travel around and teach workshops. It gave you a credential that other people didn't have. And when I was given that, and at that time, in 2001 and 2002, there were only about 26 people that were certified, totally. By the time, by 2009, even later, because about 2011, there were several hundred people that had been certified and authorized, and all that whole process of how many times you had to come to be before you could be certified. All of that regulation was added when it certainly wasn't there in the beginning.
Yeah, I suppose I wanted you to speak that out again because, for someone coming later, even me, and I came quite a while back, it wasn't clear that there was a different story before that, which is somehow nice to hear that. And what was your break with it? I mean, because you have a story, and I suppose I want you to tell it again about how you ended up kind of breaking with finally with Sharat and going over to Saraswati.
In 2007, I want to give two years before this. In 2007, my daughter Inanna was married. She was born just as we came to Australia. She was married, and in 2008, my first granddaughter was married. Was born, Lalita. And so, while I was doing my end of year exams is when Pattabhi Joyce died. And I did not go back for the funeral. And that set up a bad vibration. So I understood by word of mouth through Sharratt in particular that I hadn't shown up for the cremation. So after that was when Pattabhi Joyce died. 10 days after Pattabhi Joyce died, Simi left and we separated. So I was in a heap. I saw a card reader and she said, "Get out of town. You need to get away from this." And so I went out to teach, and several people offered me teaching jobs. And I stopped on the way in Mysore to study with Sharratt because I wanted to renew the good feelings rather than him being upset with me over not coming to the cremation. So he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I came to support you, Sharratt." And because it was that political time that was going on then. So he signed me up and I started classes. When he started teaching his very fast guided primary classes and intermediate class, particularly primary, I went to him and I said, "Sharratt, my 65-year-old body is having trouble staying up with the speed with which you are teaching this. And I have been sick. I'm kind of in a bad place right now. I don't think I can handle it." He said, "You come." I said, okay. So there was one weekend where there were a moon day and a two lead classes together. He had previously said, those who don't come to lead class, 2,000 rupees fine. And so I walked in that day. I did not go to the classes. I walked in the day after those two lead classes. And when he said, "No, once more you come," I went into a group of 60 people that I had never met in my life. I was supposed to be a certified teacher. And I walked in and went to my place. And he said, "David, 4 rupees fine, 4,000 rupees fine." And I was very embarrassed because he had called attention to me and he had called it in a negative way to me. And I felt really embarrassed, like I did when my jaw was broken. So I waited until he walked over to me to give me an adjustment. And I kind of whispered to him, I said, "Sharratt, I mean no disrespect for you, but I simply can't keep up with your classes." And he said, "I don't care, you come," in a kind of gruff voice. And that made me decide that was my end of my relationship with Sharratt. I had thought up until that time, when he came to Australia, all those different things that we did together had been really good. And I thought of him as the second to Guruji and the one who gave me many of my postures. But I felt like he had taken on a different robe, a different mantle in his role and it was not the same Sharratt that I had been dealing with before, and I didn't want to be embarrassed by him. So at that same year, I was at the Alliance Française after being in Mysore, and I got a call from Eddie Stern saying the Joyce Yoga people in Sydney, the new shala that was being set up in Sydney, want teachers. Can you go there and teach? And I said, sure. That was 2010. So I went there to teach. They asked me to stay. I stayed there 2010, 11, and 12. In 12, Saraswati came to teach. And I asked her if she wanted me to adjust for it, really, and she said, no. And I said, okay, fine, no problem. And then later on, she said, okay, you adjust. And then she asked me, she said, are you sick? And I said, I have not been well. Yes. She said, you come to Mysore and you study with me. And I said, okay. That was 2013. So in 2013, I went to Mysore and she kind of took me under her wing. And she went very slowly with me. I went back to primary. I was doing the best primary that I possibly could do. and she invited me to share its open house. She invited me for all sorts of different things that really treated me the same way Guruji had treated me. And I felt back, at least under her good graces, a part of the family. And then she asked me to adjust in her class. And that really thrilled me to bits because it gave me, I didn't have to travel anymore with Have Yoga with Travel. I could go each summer and work there, and she wanted me to work and teach for her. And she would go on a tour and leave me there to handle the big shala and teach the big classes. And that was really, I loved that. That made me feel good.
So you were employed by her? She was paying you?
Oh, no, never.
No, I didn't think so.
You just gave me the honor of teaching the class.
Yeah. Right, yeah. That's right.
Or the honor of adjusting. No.
Yeah.
No payment.
No. Don't talk about money with them.
But I did that up until 2019, 2 years ago, and then came home and was locked down.
Right. Yeah. So where are we? Surely we've gone to the third stage or the fourth. It's very interesting that so many reflections, and you're such an evocative storyteller. And with this upbringing, I never realized on the last interview that this occurred at all, because I was asking all these questions about yoga. But it seems to be that so much of what comes to mind is that so much of one's life is kind of founded inevitably on those on the early years, right? And when you talk about this kind of being called a sissy in the sense of kind of humiliation that you had in the early years and the timidity that you had, do you feel that you've gone through that, or do you feel that it stayed with you? And this is a kind of outside the box question, I suppose.
That's where the yoga fits in. That's where the yoga ties it all together. That's where the yoga, when I started doing Ashtanga yoga, I thought, I can do this. This is something that I can do, and I can be good at it because it has the steps to it. It has everything that I need. It has the rhythm. It has something that I'm used to, and I can be good at this. I wanted to be good at something in my life and not being dependent on anybody for that, like a university or whatever, a school. And it really, all of those influences from my life that had made me feel insecure or whatever, I felt secure. And Guruji liked me, and I could teach, and people were asking me to teach. I mean, it couldn't get any better than that. It was just the best. And then Guruji died. And it all kind of folded in on itself. And so then I limped along from that point on, doing the best I could, but not having the same spirit that I had when it was a tribe and it was all together and he was the leader.
Right. And then the next stage, in the Vanaprastha stage, or what stage would you say you met Saraswati? What stage of your life was that?
She didn't start, in my experience, she didn't start adjusting in the classes until Guruji had, after 2006. Guruji stubbed his toe in 2006. It became septic. He almost died. He was very ill. He would sit up in his chair. He would fall asleep while he was calling a guided class. It was really a difficult situation for Sharat to have to pitch in and keep things going. But that's when the whole family pitched in and started teaching. Even Sharat's wife was teaching and adjusting because 300 people were showing up and there were just not enough heads.
Yeah.
And up until that point, the understanding that I had always heard is no one teaches in this place but the family and Tim Miller. Tim had somehow lived with the family and had become endeared to the family and had a special certificate from Pattabhi Joyce. And so the only people that could adjust were the family and Tim Miller.
And I did know somehow he lived with the family. I don't know how he ended up in that position, but he had to take his food in another room. I remember he had to eat. They've given him his meal in his bedroom or something like that. I remember that. Right. So I suppose what I'm kind of wrangling around is that the last stage of your life, which is it going back to women again? Because I like the way you framed it as the first stage being men, the second stage being women. What about the other two stages? Do they fall in those polarities as well?
The huge stage was the householder, being with my children and getting them from zero to universities and through and working for them in their whatever they wanted to do with their lives, and really into that. They were very self-directed people. This stage now is called solitude. I am on my own. Simi's around. She has her own house down at the beach. I see her maybe once a week. I'm very grateful now to have Youngblood living me with only 20 minutes walk away from me. And he's been extra gracious since this COVID thing hit he calls me every night. I mean, that has really, really, really wonderful. But in terms of teaching or doing my practice with other people or being a part of any yoga tribe or whatever, I'm here in this house. And that is the sannyasi time for me to read books, I go on my walks. I sit in the arboretum of the Adelaide Botanical Gardens and go and try to recite as many of the chants that I can remember. I can do the Gayatri sitting there as the sun is rising. Those are the kind of things that bring me a great deal of sustenance, as it were. And reading, once I got this prognosis I had 3 months to live, I had a great deal of communication from friends and relatives of their concern about that. And some were sending me books on dying, one by Ram Dass and another by Thich Nhat Hanh. Those have been really comforting. But now that I've reached kind of what they call smoldering stage of this disease, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think I'm prepared now for the solitude.
What, smoldering?
Yeah, smoldering multiple myeloma. It means that it's at a kind of static stage. It's not getting any better or it's not getting any worse.
Right, because as we were talking before, you've already exceeded your prognosis now for your extra time.
From here on, it's gravy from here on.
You're going, yeah, exactly. And you talk about reading these books, and I mean, this is, the retrospective of your life has kind of been fascinating. But what are your thoughts about the future? Do you have any thoughts about the future? Or?
I'm taking it a day at a time because of the prognosis, because of the disease. I mean, it's kind of comical to me to try to get up and down off the floor. This man who had been an Ashtangi and a certified Ashtangi, and I have to go through about 6 different moves to get myself up off of the floor because of the difficulty in my joints to do that. And I have to laugh because it's just this old man that and Guruji used to say, you can do this until you die. Wrong. I always wondered why Guruji stopped doing the practice, and they said it was because his son, as his tapas, because of his son's death. I think it was because it was just too bloody hard, and he didn't want to do it anymore. And I understand that. And I did it until I was 70, and now it's too bloody hard.
70 is pretty good. 70 is pretty good. So now you're just kind of walking and maintenance, and you're doing some yoga. As I understand, you're doing some yoga still.
I do 5 kilometers a day on my little phone. I measure it, and I do it a good clip, my New York style clip, and I do some exercises. I lie on the floor. I lie with my legs up the wall. I lie with my legs over benches. I can get into lotus still. It's just what I can do. You do what you can do. Not what you want to do, but what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
And I do the pranayama. I do pranayama while I'm walking. I do pranayama while I'm sitting in the park. I don't have to sit in lotus and do it. I can do it sitting on a bench. That helps.
I'm sorry if it's an impertinent question, but maybe let's go a bit deeper and ask you about reflections on what you've told me, reflections on your life. And anything particular that comes to mind about, are you happy with everything you did, or would you have said you would have done something different? Or, I mean, we talked last time and you said your greatest achievement was the family, which is completely understandable. What else outside that what else comes to mind when you look back on your life?
If you ask, depending on the day that you ask me, I would say,
yeah, I'm sure.
I would say, I would never say that I had a happy life. I would never say that it was filled with happiness, because there was too much death, there was too much pain, there was too much separation, there were too many difficult things in it. But it has these wonderful moments that I can reflect on that that mean a great deal to me. And as I said before, that those reflection moments have to do with Have Yoga Will Travel, have to do with my marriage, have to do with my children. They're not so much yoga. They have to do with what has gone on in my life that has enriched my life with my family.
And reflections on death, fear. Are you interested in the metaphysical view of yoga? I mean, how much do you subscribe to? I
have done a study of the Bhagavad Gita twice through with Swami Martananda. I've learned a great deal from that. I have learned a great deal from reading Buddhist text. I'm not concerned so much about dying. I think it's just going to be, it's another experience that I'm happy to go to. But for the very reasons that I just told you, of solitude and of not thinking back and just thinking, oh, I wish I could have, don't go back and do that. I wish I could go back and do that. A happiness. No, I'm ready for the next experience. And that has been what my whole life has been, is just keep walking forward, take the next step forward, and follow your nose. Just keep going and see what happens.
Yeah. I think ever since that last interview, I've been thinking on that. And I think you said something on the last interview that we didn't manage to publish, and something like you're excited, slightly excited by the next experience.
Yeah, definitely. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about how we are materialized at a particular point of time, and then we're dematerialized, and then perhaps we'll be materialized in another way or not. It just depends on how things are materialized when it is their time. And I feel like all that is out of my control. I'll just follow. I don't know what happened before I was born. I don't know what will happen after I'm born, after I die. It doesn't really concern me. I'm not in control of it.
Did you feel, I mean, just as a parting kind of thought and question, the issues around your early upbringing are really fascinating. And do you feel like you ever resolved those issues with the man and with men? And you said you had a really nurturing experience with Batavi Joyce that you appreciated a lot, and those seemed like rich years for you. But you had a lot of really suffering in your early years, which, to degrees like, around men and manhood, I can relate to as well.
I adore men. Just being with men who are at ease with being men, who are at ease with being manly, and do not need to practice on me, or to compete with me, or to put me down, or to that kind of alpha male, beta male thing that happens in most situations, particularly if women are around, when there's the competition that ultimately goes on to show off. And when I can be around men who are gay sensitive, men who are bisexual, men who are masculine and heterosexual, but are open to other people in life, I love being around men and talking and exchanging with them in an open way. What I can't be around are the macho men. It just makes me uncomfortable. I feel like I have to compete, and I don't want to do that.
I can't really imagine you competing. Did you used to compete?
Of course. I could tell my stories about my children, and I could mention within the first 30 seconds, I could mention my wife and family. I mean, if you tell people you're a dancer and you tell people you have been a dancer and you teach dance, I mean, you need to back it up. But I have a wife and child.
Oh, right. Okay.
Ultimately,
Okay.
you're a faggot, and that you throw up the blinds and protect yourself from that in order to be able to compete, to hold up your
Mm.
your worth that you've decided.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm,
So
mm.
you compete on their level. If you feel that that's the level that's coming on, then you compete on their level. And then when you don't have to compete, it's so wonderful just to sit and be with people that don't require that, men and women.
I think I remember like trying to end the interview on the last time asking you like any final reflections, and you said, "Well, I prefer being asked questions," and you are very straightforward. I mean, I think it's a southern thing as well. You know, that southern kind of like just straightforwardness. I have a friend like I mean Larry Hobbs, who's another southern man from I think he's from South Carolina. He's got the similar kind of straightforwardness to you. So instead I'm going to end on just asking you what your kind of happy pleasures. You mentioned in the daytime now, just the enjoyment, just the enjoyment of being alive and in the arboreum, reading the yoga philosophy, doing the pranayamas, chanting the mantras that you remember. You know, what other things? You know, if we just
I think
give you joy to be
my
alive.
greatest joy is what we just did, and that is for me to speak my truth without having to tell to isolate part of it. For my whole life, I have had to tell two stories: the story before, after my marriage, before kids, after kids, and to abbreviate, to discount, and that becomes an obsession. Who have you told what? How do you keep it? And generally, you wind up bunching everything up inside. To be able to open up and say to you what I've said tonight has been is wonderful. Whoever listens to it, it doesn't matter to me, but it is my truth. It is what I have gone through, and it has been an up and down, but it, it's been an up and down life.
Yeah, I think. I shan't take more of your time, but it's been a wonderful episode. I mean, and just profound and really, yeah, and a much better one than last time, I think. And I'm lost for words really. And I think, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing this with us. And I know it will be a very much appreciated episode generally by the listeners. So you know, thanks so much for coming on, and I think it's really great. Like, may I finally say that you've given a life that is honest, and to say that it has moments of profound happiness, but there's been a lot of suffering there as well. You know, which is I think an important thing for people to hear from someone you know of your age and now you know kind of facing the last years of your life. That that life is varied, but it's all things. You know, there's not just one great. You know, looking back, everything was wonderful. People will often say that, right? I wouldn't change a thing. They say, well, you know, well, sure, you know, I mean, like your life's your life, right? But I mean, nevertheless, you know, yeah.
Well, thank you for giving me the second chance.
Well, you've got a second chance now. You're past your prognosis. Let's see if we get a third one in. And if you're around in 6 months, let's have another chat. And I know you can say more. Right. Well, thanks, David.
Thank you.